Welcome and thank you for joining us for our Workday chats today. I'm Josh Krist, head of research on the content marketing team, and your host for today's discussion. I'm thrilled to be joined by two of my favorite people here at Workday, Phil Willburn, Vice President of People Analytics, Insights, and Experiences, and Greg Anderson, Principal Product Marketing Manager for Talent and Insights. For those of you tuning in, if you have any questions, please share them in the chat. First, just to kind of ground everyone on where we're getting our insights from. Greg, can you talk a little bit about where you get your hiring and recruiting trends data and big picture, what you're seeing?
Perfect. Yeah, thanks, Josh. And also thank you everyone for joining today. I think to kind of ground how we're doing the analysis, one of the things that we've been doing for a bit at Workday, particularly on the recruiting side, is monitoring business process transactions. And so that originally started from just understanding usage, kind of what scale our customers are adopting and leveraging functionality, just so we can make sure we can kind of keep up with that. But one of the things we quickly realized as we started doing that analysis was by trending that over time, we can kind of quickly get some insights into how is hiring kind of trending over time within a year and year over year, and really getting insights into what are the hiring dynamics that are playing out within our customer base. So with that, our data set encompasses over 3,100 customers, spanning about 39 countries. And there are a couple of key things that really floated up to the top in the analysis of looking back at 2023. So one of the big things is that we might be starting to approach the bottom of the downturn, and hiring may start to stabilize in 2024. Hiring was still down compared to 2022. It's about 13%. But one of the things we like to look at is kind of the first half to the second half of the year. And when we did that comparison, we saw that there was only a 2% decline in the number of requisitions that were created. And so kind of looking at that, that's an indication that we may be starting to reach potentially the bottom. Things may start to stabilize kind of going into 2024 and kind of seeing what the new normal for hiring will be as we kind of enter this year. As we looked at things globally, there's variability definitely by country, but if we look at it overall, what we saw was generally a smaller decline in requisitions. In 2023, there was about a 6% decline globally compared to about a 15% decline specifically here in the US. Offers only declined by 2% compared to 10% here in the US. And there was also a pretty big spike in applicant volumes as well. So that went up by 49% compared to 26% here in the US. So that may lead us to believe that some of the factors that are playing out here in the States are also happening globally, but not quite at the same scale and intensity. The other way we like to look at the information is really looking at it from an industry perspective, because we also know not all industries are the same. There's some unique dynamics that play out. And for the most part, a lot of industries moved in the same general direction, but there were two that really stood out, and that was healthcare and the public sector. Healthcare pretty much ran consistently against the broader trends where they had strong growth in requisitions, applicant volumes, and offers, which kind of makes sense. Healthcare is kind of in a state of perpetual hiring. And so they really ran counter to broader trends as well as the public sector. So it really is interesting to see how some of these trends can pivot as you look at industries. And then the last big takeaway that we saw with the data was what's the impact to the job seeker? And the big thing is it's a really competitive job market, which many people can attest to. Applicant volumes are red hot. We had a 32% increase in the number of applicants compared to 2022. So there's this huge pool of talent out there that's looking for work. And that inevitably means that you have more people competing over fewer jobs. So it's really challenging for job seekers today. And so those are some of the big takeaways we saw on the hiring front.
Wow. And one thing I noticed that, or you have mentioned that healthcare often runs counter to a lot of the industry trends. And this time it's healthcare and public sector. I know you have, can you talk about that just for a second? So what do you think is going on in both of those? And I know you have a little bit of background in healthcare.
Yeah. So I spent a lot of my career outside of the recruiting space. Healthcare is kind of the other child that I love dearly. And that's an industry where it's just very challenging to fill those roles. It's a lot of frontline worker positions. There are also positions that have really specific qualifications that are needed to do the job. You need to have certain certifications, certain experience. And so also kind of coming out of the pandemic, healthcare was as directly affected as any industry. So there was a lot of churn in that space, a lot of experienced talent retired or just opted out of the workforce at that point. So healthcare has always kind of been struggling, and the pandemic kind of really exacerbated that dynamic where there's still a deficit of talent, particularly around nursing, or hospitals really looking and skilled care centers looking to fill those positions. So there's kind of that and there's kind of a general understanding that healthcare is a bit of economy resistant. It's just people are always getting sick. People also always need care. So there's always a demand for talent there, where in other industries, there are kind of peaks and valleys. And public sector as well is another industry. A lot of front-facing organizations are starting to staff back up. So there is kind of that, okay, we need to kind of aggressively hire, where other industries really bulked up during the pandemic and now are realizing, hey, we need to calibrate down a bit based off those highs.
Wow, that's really interesting. And then Phil, can you talk a little bit about Workday benchmarking data and some of the trends that you're seeing there?
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Fascinating, Greg. All the insights you're getting from the hiring data, and we see some of that data, the trends that you mentioned in the benchmark data. So Workday benchmarking is actually a product that's available to all of our customers, and what it is a standardized set of metrics that our customers can opt into to see how they're performing against their peers in the same industry. So like KPI comparisons, for example, Josh. So we have metrics in this huge database, standardized metrics like annualizing quarterly turnover, both for voluntary and involuntary turnover. We have high performer turnover. There are promotion rates, worker tenure, time since last promotion, percent of women in management, and 60 more metrics. So it's a fascinating group of insights. And the data includes, it's pretty big. It's about 2,000 organizations representing 198 countries, and just over 6.5+ million workers are involved. So quite robust. Now, kind of what we're seeing in 2023, I think it's, again, some similar things. Greg, you just said, how many industries kind of bulked up during the pandemic and now are maybe optimizing right now. That's what we're seeing in this data. Across the board, voluntary turnover was way down this year in 2023, especially compared to 2022, and involuntary turnover was way up. So this was by far the defining characteristic of 2023. And we saw this almost across every industry, except for healthcare, like you mentioned. But let me just give you an example for tech, how big this was. So voluntary turnover, people leaving by their own will, was down 38% year over year compared to 2022. And involuntary turnover in the tech industry was up 39%. So this is a big shift that we experience in the workforce in many industries this year. So that's the kind of first macro trend that we see from the benchmarking data. The second trend we see, also very interesting, is that Greg, you'd mentioned hiring is declining, a bit, especially coming off the highs in 2022. We also see promotions declining quite a bit. So we saw universal year-over-year decline in promotion rates. So think about this. Employees were not leaving their jobs voluntarily, even though they were way less likely to receive a promotion compared to prior years. And hiring was down. So this is a pretty interesting, I would say, combination of things that are happening in the environment, which cause some interesting behaviors, right? I think, and again, reference the tech industry, this was the most pronounced. Promotion rates decreased by 25% compared to 2022. So that's a big change. And then, Josh, the third thing here that we see in the data is that the turnover, hiring, and promotion trends, what does that equal? It equals increased time in job and increased time in their employees' positions. So the consequence of this is that people are staying in their jobs longer, and they're staying in their positions longer, which means they're gathering all the knowledge and the insights they can have to be potentially more productive or potentially more high performing. And in technology, for example, we saw a 33% increase in the average time in job profiles since 2022. So that's a pretty interesting trend that I thought right there. And I think it's going to have some, I think impacts as we look to 2024. Now, if you let me pause and say two additional things, Josh, Greg, I know you guys probably letting me pause anyways, because I'm on a roll here. Number one, what's amazing both about the hiring and the benchmarking data is that they've been remarkably consistent on how the industries have moved together. Now, healthcare that we mentioned is out a little bit differently, maybe public sector, but generally industries don't move like this. And that's because I still think we're having the impact of post-pandemic and the macro environment, which is causing this consistency. And the second thing I would want to say about this data, both the hiring and benchmark data, is these come from high-performing companies. These are not your average companies because most of Workday customers, they're in the top performing in their industry. So these benchmarks are from high-performing companies. All right, Josh, maybe I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, no, I mean, so it seems like we're really in an interesting place. The hiring slowdown might be nearing its end. There's a ton of seasoned employees who are probably itching to grow because they haven't been promoted in a while. But, on the other hand, we can see through our peak on employee voice across industries, across geographies, engagement is going down. And so when and if things change, and it's always when, not an if, things will change. How, we don't know. But these employees, when they get a chance to stretch their legs, they just might do that. So it's a complicated picture. So maybe, Phil, can you start off with, 2024, it promises to be a geopolitical roller coaster. There's a lot going on. But what should talent leaders be doing to take advantage of this moment?
Yeah, I think you said it spot on. There is a moment right now. And when you look at the hiring and the talent trends, I think we're in this kind of magical spot. The conditions for creating high-performing organizations are all there, only if we can lean in and take advantage of them and avoid costly moves that some organizations are doing. And I think for HR and talent leaders, there are three things that can help them take advantage of this potential, and I say potential, golden opportunity. The first one is around optimizing your talent practices. So that's whether you're hiring and your hiring and candidate experience, your performance management practices, your workforce planning activities. If you haven't optimized these already, you're going to continue to miss out on the speed and agility needed for your employees to perform. And maybe I just give you an example here at Workday. So inside Workday, for example, we've streamlined our rec approval process so that hiring managers get their approved recs directly in their inbox. So not only does this speed up hiring, great, which I'm sure you're happy about, but also reduces the manual reconciliation that both finance and TA have to do. And we've estimated that we're saving about a day to a day and a half of our finance planners' time just by doing this optimization.
Yeah, Phil, just to jump in quickly, I think that's a great point. And it's something that we have a lot of conversations with our customers on the recruiting side of, hey, there was a lot of changes that happened with the reduction in hiring and also just a rethinking of what positions are we now hiring for? What are those key positions and what should our hiring processes be to align to those positions? And that's a bit of change management of just aligning with hiring managers and executives of hey, what process do we want to have if we're looking to go after sales talent, dev talent, whatever that may be, and making sure your hiring processes reflect that. I think that's one of the big things that we have. I think that's a great example. Is it about reducing friction? Maybe it's I need to get people in as fast as possible. Mm-hmm. And we also have customers who are on the other end where hiring managers say there are too many people. It's taking me forever to kind of look through candidates. How can we adjust our screening? Here's some better skills that we're looking for. So that way, maybe you do want to add in a step. It's really kind of having those conversations and being sure aligned. So I think that optimizing is just very top of mind in a lot of the conversations I have. And I think where people are looking going forward.
Yeah, Greg, the volume is so high in the recruiting, either the candidate experience or the application or the recruiting or the screens, that if you're not optimizing, you can spend a lot of time and money in there. It may not be having the business impact you like, right? So,
yep.
All right. Advice number 2,
yes.
Josh, just so I'm following your direction here. So, I think number two thing that talent HR leaders should be thinking is to really balance a performance. Let me try to say that again, which is balance a performance focus that we're having right now with your company's values. And what do I mean by that? Many companies are focused on driving organizational performance. This is largely due to post-pandemic, a lot of economic uncertainty conditions, maybe a general reset of business practices in hybrid. But an over-focus on productivity can break down employee trust, which actually slows down performance. I recall a great recent Slack research they produced that showed that when employees trust their companies, they were 1.3 times more likely to put in extra effort and 1.2 times more likely to say they'll go above and beyond at work, which I think is pretty amazing, right? Maybe just an example here. So at Workday, when it came to elevating performance for us, our performance practices, we first focused on our employee values, which we talk about often, lifting each other up to do our best work. So focusing on our values, then we had the supporting mechanisms like differentiated pay for our highest performers, more regular check-ins, aligned contributions and development goals, reducing the barriers to productivity by reducing time in meetings, and etc. All of these were supportive of our employee value of lifting each other up to do our best work, as opposed to doing something in addition.
Right. And was there a third piece of advice?
Yes. Thank you for reminding me I had 3 pieces, and this is the third one. So yes, third piece. Here we go. Lastly, I'd suggest that retention is the new recruiting. Josh, I know I've heard you say that multiple times. I've heard our CMOs say that. I heard Ashley, our Chief People Officer, often say this. There are signs that this, this change is kind of pent up. People have been staying in roles. They haven't been getting promotions. It could change in 2024 this year. And we see that the global engagement data is going down. There's additional research from Guild, which is a Workday Ventures partner, found that 81% of business executives say they're concerned about losing top performers who are unengaged. So retention, again, is the new recruiting. By keeping your top performers, by keeping your people motivated and excited, you're going to be helping your recruiting organization, because then they don't have to go out and hire for these roles or screen all these roles and everything. So I think retention is going to be even more important this year.
Yeah. And part of retention is upskilling. And I know that Greg found some really interesting data about, when you can put some structure around your upskilling efforts, you see some pretty amazing results. And so Greg, I don't know if you want to talk about that real quick, because I found it really fascinating.
No, definitely. And I think to kind of carry through on kind of Phil's last piece of advice there, I think that retention is the new hiring is really true in a very tactical way. We're also seeing organizations like talent acquisition and talent management really partnering up to kind of create kind of almost mini centers of excellence, where they're really focused in on how do we maximize internal mobility. If we're hiring fewer positions, there's far more candidates. Is there an opportunity to keep and engage the really competent and really talented people that we have within our organization and move them into new roles? And I think kind of talking about upskilling, I think it's a really interesting area, because I think there's a couple of key things that we see when we talk about like upskilling, growing talent internally. So one of the other areas in where we're doing research is around just kind of that internal mobility space of around how are organizations actually executing on it when it comes to those. So what we've been able to recently see, we looked at the second half of 2023, and we're able to look at how our customers who are using some of our internal mobility talent development functionalities performing on those metrics. So we looked at it from 2 angles. So the first angle is really around intent. So what do we mean by that? So for us, that is, have I expressed interest? Have I submitted an application for a new job? That's kind of the initial intent of kind of looking at things on a spectrum, like how many people are actually doing that. What we often hear is that in of itself is kind of the initial and kind of hardest barrier. It's just so hard to know what jobs are available, apply to it. It's just a lot of friction. So what we've been able to see is that customers who've been leveraging Workday Talent Marketplace and Workday Career Hub have seen about 184% uplift in that intent ratio. And so how many internal employees are actually submitting applications for new jobs. And so kind of continuing on that spectrum, the second part of that is actual. So how many people actually change jobs once they submitted an application, kind of looking at it from that life cycle. And then what we've seen there, and these numbers are just so impressive and just really exciting to see, is that there was about 101% uplift in the amount of job changes that we saw with customers who use Talent Marketplace and Career Hub compared to those who don't. So I think we're really proud of those numbers. I think it's really great to see customers generating such huge value and really having a real direct impact. But there's some other takeaways that I really want to kind of highlight as we think about those numbers and give them a bit more context. So I think one is you definitely need great tech to execute on internal mobility programs, that it's such a priority now that you really do need to have a tech solution that allows you to design it, execute it, and most importantly, scale it. Like with all the downturn, there are not as many people. Organizations are really focused on efficiency and how do we operate really lean. And I think that's kind of really the opportunity seen with technology is how do we fill that gap? How do we amplify, augment talent leaders' capabilities to kind of foster these programs? So I think that's where things like AI and ML really have a huge impact of how do we leverage these tools to really amplify what organizations are capable of doing and having people focus on kind of key priorities. But I think the other key thing is just as important, tech is not a magical cure-all. I think one of the big things, and this is something we hear time and time again, I know it's something that we look here at Workday, is you really need to have that strong executive buy-in and support that really works its way down through the organization. It can't just stay at the executive level. It has to work its way down through managers and to employees where there's a real belief that, okay, we're really committed to this and this is actually getting out there. And in addition to that executive buy-in that I think is key, without it'll probably, your IM programs tend to fall off. One of the other big elements is just that there's a really big culture change that comes with internal mobility programs. I think we've all been in that position where we felt the stress of someone on our team takes a new opportunity on another area in the org or a different team. And we're like, oh my God, that was a great performer. I need to backfill. I need to onboard this person. I have these deliverables. And it just creates this stress and anxiety. And it creates like this hoarding mentality of like, no, this is my team. I need to protect my team. I need to keep my team. But what we know, and we hear this time and time again, the tighter we hold on to talent and the more friction we create to growth, the more likely they're going to go seek that growth, and they'll probably seek that growth outside of your company. So kind of how do you pivot from like a hoarding mentality to an abundance mentality of like, hey, look at all this great talent we have at Workday, at our company. How can I tap talent and have talent move freely within the organization? And I think once organizations make that pivot, it's a real switch that goes off of like, oh, okay, it's no longer I'm losing someone. It's like, hey, I can gain someone who's bringing different skills and perspective to my team. And so I think that's really key. And then the last one is really around redefining what internal mobility means. I know very traditionally we think internal mobility is like, did I get promoted? Did I make a vertical move within my organization? And I think that's still true. But it's also, there's a lot of different forms of internal mobility. It could be taking a lateral move. I'm in product marketing. May I want to move over to product management in kind of a similar type role, but just on a different department. Maybe I want to take a short-term big project or get some exposure in another area. And so I'll do that. All those are forms of mobility that I think we often forget, but have huge impacts on satisfaction, engagement, retention, skills growth. And so it's keep your options open, like really broaden your horizons and really kind of lean into some of these other ways to grow your workforce, even if it is not a direct move in kind of whatever particular role that they're in. There's a lot of opportunities, and what you'll find is employees are eager. They want to feel that investment. So really kind of take full advantage of those different models of mobility that are out there.
Yeah, Greg, and I think, sorry if I can just chime in here, Josh. I think it's not only beneficial for employees, but it's beneficial for the business, right? Just share example here. At Workday, we've seen huge benefits internally for internal mobility, for our people, our employees, our workmates who make internal moves. We see faster ramp up time and higher performance for those people who move internally. We even see improved sentiment, by like 30% improved sentiment for those people who made internal moves. And this isn't vertical moves, right? Greg, Josh, this is horizontal moves. So even just taking a horizontal move, not increase pay, not increase level, people's sentiment improve, employee sentiment improve because they've seen those opportunities. And even better, we saw a 26% increase in retention for our employees who made internal moves. So it's not only good, for our employees, great for the business, but we're retaining these employees as they make these internal moves.
Right. And I was just going to say, as a workmate, to Greg's points and to your point just now, Phil, gigs, it's just one tool in a bigger tool set. But the idea that, I can do this short-term project with people I wouldn't normally interact with, launch something new, get something new going, and still stay in my role. But, that through the gig, that changes what my role will be. And it just helps me grow as a person. So actually, to wrap it up, I wanted to ask you both about maybe your internal mobility story and what internal mobility looks like for you.
Sure, I'll go first. So I think one of the things, and I know we've talked about this before, I think gigs have been something that I've really looked to take advantage of here at Workday. I think it's an opportunity of, if you have interest, of like getting your feet wet, like, oh, let me get a little sample of like what work will look like in this particular area. I think even just the hiring trends report that we've been doing in this analysis started off as a gig. It was something that our GM at the time, David Summers, was really passionate about and put together a team. I happen to be a part of that gig, and that's how we've all come to kind of know each other here at Workday. And I think that's a great example of something that was a priority for the business that we really wanted to do. There was an opportunity. And I think, to Phil's point earlier, that transparency is so key, of just like, once out there to participate in. I may want to do that, I may not, but just having that available and easy to see, I think, is really key. And I think this was just like a great example of something that I wasn't necessarily actively looking for, but then I saw it and I was like, oh, wow, this is really cool. And now it's turned into this ongoing thing that we do. So for me, I think that's just like a prime example of, I've developed a lot of new skills. I've made great relationships within the organization. I feel more committed and attached to the company. And I think those are all the things that anyone's looking for in their careers, is to have those opportunities and moments where you get to grow in that way. So I think that was a great example from my own personal career.
Yeah.
How could you say anything better than that? I mean, come on, Josh. Like, I was going to say, you stole my thunder. I like this hiring a talent trends report. It was a gig, right? And I would have never met either one of you if I didn't participate in this. It's not my full-time. I know it's not anybody's full-time thing, but like, I think just the relationships and how much I've learned from both of you has been amazing. So that's been great. And I've opened up a couple gigs on my team for different work. The talent's been awesome. So this is, that's what I would say, Josh. It's everything that Greg said in a perfectly eloquent way, in which I would just say ditto to that.
All right. Well, thanks for joining me today, both of you. I really liked our conversation. And I hope our viewers share some of the same sense of maybe optimism cut with a strong dose of urgency. Like, to your point, Phil, it's a moment and moments pass. So if you're interested in learning more, stay tuned for the full report next month, and let us know what topics you're interested in exploring in future Workday chats in the comments. Have a great Workday.